Welcome to the schemings of Bella May. What's Zendaya going to wear to the Spider-Man premiere? I have absolutely no idea. But that is why I'm going to design and make something which could be worn to this premiere and hopefully captures the style and vibe of Spider-Man. Anyway, I should probably explain to any newcomers here, I have started a costume series where I take a popular fictional character and create a fashionable, hopefully worthy of the red carpet look based on the style and outfits of said character. So I've done Black Widow, Cinderella, and Hobbit, and now it's Spidey's turn. So with all that, let's get right into it. When designing these looks, I first pull in some reference photos. From there, I just start drawing the few lines and characteristics of the outfit that I want to copy on this fashion piece. So in this case, I knew I really wanted the web look that's going on in the suit, so I'm copying some of those lines. And I really like how the blue part of the suit is at the sides and then goes down into the pants. Another thing is this black section going from the body to the arms, and it creates a really nice line to the suit, and I think it'll create a nice line for the dress. So now that I've got some basic lines going on, I'm just gonna quickly fill in some color. And while I'm doing this, you'll notice that I'm not doing any color in the shoulder area. That's because this area isn't going to have any fabric in it. It's just gonna be bare skin, and the black lines will be a string sort of woven like a web, and then the red fabric in the center is going to be held up by that web and create a sort of halter look. Quick sidetrack here, after designing this, I realized that Zendaya did wear a Spider-Man inspired dress to the red carpet premiere of Far From Home. And it actually has the same halter type shape going on in the front, but hey, that just kind of means that maybe she'd actually wear my design. Anyway, back to the sketch. Now, you might notice these slightly flowy sleeves I've added onto the sketch. I'm not sure if those are actually going to happen. I think in the end they would take away from the whole look, but if anything, they would be a very sheer fabric to sort of look like webs in some way. So, oh, and also I added these horizontal lines to the web look that will fully sell that web look. So now that we have a good idea as far as design, it's a matter of figuring out how that sketch can be turned into reality with fabric and materials. So the red and the web line, I'm thinking, will be a dress, and then the blue will sort of be an overdress placed on top of that red dress. That's kind of what I'm thinking. I don't know if that'll happen, but the blue fabric is going to be a stiffer fabric so that it has really nice structure when it flares out into the skirt. And I'm also going to keep the blue pretty fitted over the hips, and then it will go out into a skirt. And then for the red, I want it to be a really flowy fabric to create a nice loose look underneath the structure of the blue fabric. So I don't know how that will work, and that's a lot of talk, so we're just gonna bring some action and actual doing into this video. The first step is to spin the web for the top part of the dress. Using this satin lacing, I'm first arranging the vertical lines, and then I'll go over them with the horizontal ones. Once I did one side, I then replicated it on the second, and then also did the back. I'm just pinning it all together for now. But now comes a whole bunch of hand sewing.
To make sure the second side is exactly like the first, I'm measuring each connection point in relation to the first side that I've already sewn. For the back of this web lacing stuff, I of course need some type of closure so that I can get this thing on and off. This stumped me for a bit, but finally I just went with these large black buttons and made loops with the lacing. On all the cut ends of the lacing, I tried my best to sew the ends pretty well to contain all the fraying, but it certainly didn't contain all of it, so I'm going over all those ends with some fray check. Now that I have my web made, I've got all my lines and I can decide where I want the red part of the dress to be. So I've pinned out the area and I now take off the web and I'm laying some small tape along that pinned out area. Now I have this front shape and I can go ahead and drape the red fabric. For this front section, I wanted it on a bias. From there, it's just playing around with the fabric to create the look I'm going for. After doing the front section on the bias, I realized that just draping the whole red part of this dress on a bias would be a great idea, because who doesn't love a good bias cut dress? Once I got some good lines going on with the red, I'm placing my web on top and making sure everything lines up well. And when doing that, I noticed the darts on the front were pretty visible, so I'm adjusting the angle of them so that they lay right under one of the web lines. Once I got all the fabric ironed, I now am going to cut out the second side of pieces and also a lining for the center front section. For the front section, I'm first sewing the darts, and then I'm laying the two pieces together, lining and outer, and sewing the top and sides. The edges are going to lay and attach right next to the web lines, and as I was working with the fabric, I felt like just a simple folded edge of the red fabric was going to look pretty flat next to the round edge of the lacing that I used for the web. So I experimented with adding a piece of cotton string to the inside of the red seam. So this adds a little extra bulk to that edge, and after playing with it, I thought it looked good having that little extra bit in that edge. So before turning the front section right sides out, I'm sandwiching a piece of cotton string in between the seam allowances and sewing that in place. And then I trim down all the seam allowances and I can turn this piece right side out. After all the red dress pieces are sewn together, I again checked it with the web to make sure all the lines were lining up. So far, so good. Another thing to do is to tack down the lining edge of that front section. Once it's lined up, the raw edge is turned under and hand sewn in place. And now we can finally attach the web. I've got all the edges pinned in place, and before sewing it, I put it on the dress form just to make sure I got the right places pinned to the right places, and also just to make sure everything was laying smoothly. And now a bunch of hand sewing to get that web edge sewn to the red. At the back, an invisible zipper is sewn in place. And before moving on to the blue part of this design, there's the skirt to talk about. At each seam of the bias cut red dress, I am inserting a godet, which starts at about mid-calf. But also, I decided to add a chiffon godet piece inside these godets, so double godets. All these godets are about a quarter circle. To keep the raw edges from showing through the chiffon part of the skirt, I'm doing a top stitch to keep those raw edges folded onto the non-see-through side of the fabric. Now we can move on to the blue. Well, actually, this is black fabric and is going to be the lining for the blue. But because I quickly draped the pattern for this blue part of the design, and instead of going straight to the velvet and potentially the pattern not working out and wasting that fabric, I first cut it out of this cotton, so I can see if it works, and if it does, then it's the lining, and if not, then I didn't waste the velvet. After getting the pieces cut out, I tested it quickly and it worked great, so now I'll use these cotton pieces to cut out the velvet. And some cotton fabric for an interlining. And some horsehair canvas. For this canvas, there's not any seam allowance added to the pattern. I wanted the blue to have some really nice structure to it, so that's the reason for all these layers of fabric. The white cotton is an interlining, so that gets basted to the velvet. And then I can sew these pattern pieces together. Before moving on to the rest of the layers of this design, I'm going to cut and attach the skirt pieces. So for the skirt, I'm doing the same thing as with the red dress. I'm attaching godets starting around mid-calf length. Each godet again is about a quarter circle, and this is going to have a second layer of fabric to it to again add stiffness, and I'm using a cotton twill for this. Once the godets are sewn in place, it's now time to attach the horsehair canvas. The canvas is placed, and then the seam allowance will fold over it and keep it in place. Where the skirt is attached, I'm first trimming down the under seam allowance to reduce some of the bulk. To secure the seam allowances and canvas in place, I'm using a catch stitch, and there's a whole bunch of that to do. Now moving on to the hem. I wanted the hem to have a good structure, so I pulled out horsehair braid, which is actually made of poly, not horsehair. But anyway, when pinning this in place, I'm just catching the lining of the skirt because I don't want any of the hem stitches to show through to the velvet. And then I'm just sewing this edge in place. There's enough tension going on in between the braid and the fabric that machine sewing this braid in place would have been just too much of a hassle, and I don't think it would have worked as well. So anyway, once I got that edge sewn in place, I'm now actually going to attach a second piece of the braid. But this second layer of braid is actually a slightly softer braid than the first layer. This middle edge, where the two braids overlap, is then hand sewn in place. And then also the top edge of that second braid is hand sewn in place. To finish up the hem, I'm going to use a bias cut strip of fabric cut out of the cotton twill. When sewing this onto the hem, I'm sewing through the velvet and the lining. And now this edge is turned over and up, and guess what? it's hand sewn in place. And there's just a few more steps to this project. When looking at the godets of the velvet, they seem to still not have quite enough poof and structure to them, so I just grabbed some tulle and leftover Cinderella frills and created these puffy sections that will be sewn behind the godets. This won't be seen, thankfully. Once this poofiness has been sewn in place to all the godets, I'm now going to attach the lining. So this lining is just going on this bodice slash strips of the skirt, not the godets of the skirt. But anyway, the canvas is quite rough, so lining was really necessary for that area of the bodice and strips things going down to the hem. So more hand sewing is done to get all these edges sewn in place. And one more quick thing. Again, when playing with the velvet and what it was doing with the godets and such, I decided this front edge needed to be flipped back like so, and I just did some hand sewing to tack that fold in place. This helps cover the tulle, but also creates a nice line to the skirt. Oh, and an important part of this project, the closure. There are just 4 hooks and eyes which attach the blue to the red dress.